The day started like any other. I woke atop a pile of corpses, and in a groggy haze smashed a glass of mysterious red liquid directly into my face. Hit me again, bartender. The sweet revitalisation of glass shards and congealed suffering. But today seemed different. The altar that had offered me so much comfort previously, the Prie Dieu, just didn't seem to have a place in my life anymore.
Piss off! I couldn't give a fuck.
I didn't need it to restore my life force. I didn't need the sweet bile to keep me going. I certainly didn't need it for when I died, as this was going to be a single life Ironman run. And just to add a little bit spice to the mix, I also decided to avoid using the sanguine fountains, so I couldn't get that sweet bile via a sneaky reach around. I was ready to take on the challenges of this sinful world while entirely avoiding using the Prie Dieu. With that, let's get to it.
Excellent!
After a flawless execution of the Warden of the Silent Sorrow, I proceeded through the Holy Line. The main objective here, and really for most of this run, was to avoid all unnecessary bumps and bruises, as health was going to be a real shortage throughout this challenge. I tried to make good use of parries and prayers to clear the way, and keep from taking damage, but honestly, I just suck at this. The number of unnecessary blows I took was quite staggering, and it really didn't bode well that we were leaving baby's first walk in the park with almost half health. Not all hope was lost though, as I reached the game's first mea culpa altar and gained a damage upgrade. I honestly can't remember the last time I played this game with access to damage and technique upgrades, and I was really quite excited about it. If watching me suffer through the game without any upgrades, or using only prayers is more your thing though, then be sure to check them out after this video. Thankfully, the journey through the wasteland of the buried churches was a little smoother than the Holy Line. We crush most of the enemies and take only a few bumps along the way, leaving us with a little less than half health by the time we enter Mercy Dreams, which quickly tended towards very, very little health, as we get candelabraed to within an inch of death by the first enemy. Clearly needing to be far more careful, or else the run would be over very early, I made use of a prayer to keep out of harm's way. Not that harm stays away for very long, as a mad dash in the next area resulted in a quite honestly avoidable death and a full restart of the run.
Damn it.
And that's the pain in a challenge like this. Losing everything due to a few misjudged fights. Naturally, I died more than a few times, which quickly became incredibly frustrating. To save my sanity, I instead completed a bit of a dummy run where I allowed deaths so I could test things out before committing to the full challenge, which as you can see resulted in more than a few lessons being learned the hard way. Now I just need to hope I'd learned my lessons well enough. On the real attempt, our trip through Mercy Dreams proved to be slightly less of a disaster this time. It wasn't until the second room where things started to go wrong, leading to a few blows being taken. I recovered quickly and managed to beat a path through the many wraiths, before heading to the nearby shop. I grabbed the key, which will be used shortly to access the blood perpetuated in sand, and consequentially, another really important item. The journey through the last room in Mercy Dreams was not great. There were traps and enemies, and somehow I managed to become intimately familiar with almost every single one of them, leading to massive damage. To top it off, I then proceeded to have another fiery encounter with a skeleton, leading to me being firmly back in the danger zone. And that meant I was absolutely not in a good position to take on a boss. So instead, I made a point of obtaining my secret, yet not overly effective weapon for this run. I headed back to grab the blood perpetuated in sand, then used this in the Holy Line to get the painted wood bead. This bead is pretty awful to be honest, and I would never use it on a normal run, but it did offer something incredible for this challenge, a tiny sliver of healing whenever we destroy an object. So that's exactly what I did, leading to a not insignificant health top up as I headed back towards Mercy Dreams. Of course, I immediately got pummeled back to within an inch of my life, and I'd already smashed most of the objects in Mercy Dreams by mistake, so that was a complete waste of time. So yeah, I wasn't in the best of states by the time I got back outside the boss room, and this led me to something I would never normally do, making use of Viridiana. She would appear in the upcoming fight and would top her health up, which may not have been necessary for the fight itself, but could be useful for the area beyond the fight. As promised, we went in, activated the boss, and then got a nice heal to help see us through. Now this fight was honestly pretty simple to beat, completely unscathed. So instead of giving you the blow by blow, I'm going to draw your attention to the fact that I haven't once mentioned this boss by name. That's because I apparently butcher it every time I say it. For those of you in the audience that have made an attempt to educate me, I honestly do appreciate it, so let's see if I can do better this time. It turns out, His name isn't Ten Piedad. Kind of obvious when you know it's a Spanish phrase meaning have mercy. So let's see if this is an improvement. I smack Ten Piedad about and make him look stupid, before bringing him down and moving on. From there, we headed into the desecrated cistern and grabbed our first health upgrade. Not only does this boost our max health, but it also heals us completely, and entirely invalidates using Viridiana in that last fight. Ah well. And it's at this point I have to address a minor concession for this challenge. It turns out that I, as an adult with a family, sometimes need to stop playing games and I don't know, feed my children.
You have to, feed your children.
While I know the game autosaves, I didn't really want to mess about with this, so instead I decided that if I could ever get back to full health, then I could activate a Prie Dieu to guarantee a predictable save. As long as I immediately used the bile flasks, I essentially came out without any benefits, which seemed fair enough. This does repopulate the world, meaning I can redestroy some background objects to restore some health, but being that it also repopulates the enemies, I decided to call this a fair trade-off and move on with the challenge. With that small rule update out of the way, I got back to travelling through the cistern. It was a relatively uneventful affair. We absolutely took a few blows while battling through the locals, but they didn't hurt all that much. A quick slip into the poison mist did threaten to push us towards a bit of danger though, but by the time we had made it towards the western edge of the cistern, we had done our best impersonation of Link and smashed a whole load of jars to get some health back. The Mountains of the Endless Dusk came next. The spear thrower guys were a little bit of a pain in that they can donk you from a distance, and occasionally try to roll right into you. But it turned out that ripping their goddamn heads off basically made the problem go away. That is until you add a guy with a giant bell helmet to the mix, in which case things get a bit hectic, the Penitent One gets injured, and everything gets a little murdery. Next up we have the mini-boss Perpetua, which is fine. She has a few different lightning bolt attacks, but they are easy enough to dodge as long as you track the sparkling pillars. She did manage to fly straight into us at one point, dealing less damage than I expected in all honesty, but that was the only moment of any real threat. We kept bopping her until she did a runner, leaving behind a bead that offers a little lightning protection. Honda was a little tricky in all honesty. Most of the enemies were simple enough to deal with, but there were a few sections that hurt. Acerado enemies in particular have long been my bane. They absolutely killed my health bar, and there wasn't much I could do about it with there not being any breakable objects in this region. Still, somewhere between the various unfortunate blows, I was able to carve a path towards the first chain holding statue and destroy it. The route towards the second was far less comfortable though, with the room containing 4 Acerado and moving platforms almost being my undoing. It took a whole load of care getting through to the second statue, particularly when it came to dealing with an Acerado and a bell trap at the same time. But luckily, I was able to hold my nerve and carve a path through. Although I did manage to destroy the second statue, I didn't feel safe proceeding into Grievous Ascents just yet. So instead I headed up to the Brotherhood of the Silent Sorrow to get the second Mea Culpa upgrade, to further boost their damage potential. And then paid Soledad a visit to unlock a new Rosary mystery. These bead slots were essential for this run, as really we needed to make sure we equipped appropriate beads to reduce the damage we took whenever possible. I should however note that for the sake of this challenge I banned the Frozen Olive. It gives you a blanket 50% damage resistance boost across the board when you're at low health, which can easily be manipulated into providing complete damage immunity. That hardly seemed in the spirit of the run. Having escaped the frying pan of low health in Hondo, we entered the next fire of potential run-ending threat. A platforming section containing loads of spikes. Honestly, it's pretty easy, but this section and sections like this had my heart pounding. One small slip and it would be game over. Thankfully, my concern was entirely unwarranted this time. I headed up to where olive trees wither to meet Gemino. This chap needed some sacred oil from up in the convent of Our Lady of the Charred Visage, which means we had to commit to that direction if we wanted to help Gemino out. And we definitely did want to help him out, although I entirely forgot why until much later into the run. Our trip through the area was once again an almost immediate disaster, with us again being brought to within an inch of challenge failure. You would have thought by this point that I would have learnt the lesson about keeping my distance and only taking on one enemy at a time. Up in the Graveyard of the Peaks, I grabbed the Ember of Holy Cremation, which provided a decent defence against physical attacks. The journey upwards wasn't so bad. There was a decent mix of easy to kill enemies, although they were still able to chip away at our health. Thankfully, there were frozen pilgrims that could be smashed to keep us in a fairly safe state. At least until I mistimed an item pickup and ended up on death's door once more. It was close, but I did manage the final ascent and defeated the Guardian Sister, allowing access to the convent. I decided to battle through a short enemy-infested hallway and take a trip down the shortcut to get back into good shape via the second health upgrade. Now having a decent stock of tears available, I also took this opportunity to grab an awesome bead from the church in Albero. By donating 5,000 tears, I was able to get the token of appreciation, a bead that was wonderful for this run. If I didn't have any bile flasks, this would result in a 15% melee damage boost. Thankfully, I will never have any bile flasks during this run. Despite needing to take down Our Lady of the Charred Visage next, previous experience told me that getting through the convent could be on the tricky side, so I desperately scrambled for some excuse to put this off for a while. And that excuse came in the form of a trip through Grievous Ascents to grab the Silvered Lung of Dolphos. The area was pretty simple now that my damage potential was a lot higher, with us able to wipe out all of the enemies in a few blows or even a riposte. Of course, that didn't stop the chip damage from grinding us down a little bit. With some careful timing to avoid breathing in poisonous gas, I was able to climb up and grab the Silvered Lung. I immediately made use of it to secure another rosary knot, then paid Altus Gracias a quick visit to grab the Egg of Deformity. With this in hand, I was able to obtain the 3 gnarled tongues, and, as a consequence, the Solea of Excommunication. This prayer temporarily bumps my melee damage up a whole load, which got put to use before too long. Feeling a little bit more prepared, I embarked on my journey through the convent, which was far from fun. Dodging the lava pots wasn't so bad as long as you're patient, but the enemies weren't great. The fire-breathing guys have been known to catch me off guard, and the ghastly baronesses are absolute shits. They hit like a ton of bricks, and the attacks are really hard to dodge unless you can block them with terrain. Even worse, you can't even really chase them down, as one blow causes them to relocate. The room containing the red candle was particularly challenging, with a whole load of jumping enemies being mixed in with some lava traps and ghastly baronesses. Making sure you aren't caught by a laser blast while dealing with everything else that is going on proved tough. It wasn't all bad though, as I was able to grab the piece of a golden mask, which provided some much needed fire resistance for both this area and the boss. With this in hand, I headed on inside to end Our Lady's suffering. I don't have a great history with this fight. She isn't all that tough, but she was a bit of a stumbling block for me on a previous challenge, and I've got a bit of a mental block with her when it comes to dodging. The first phase proved easy enough, with us smacking her about while dodging most of her counterblows, without there being any major threat to our survival. By the time the second phase started, we were at about 70% health, which should have been fine as long as I was careful. I decided it wasn't worth the risk though, and made a point of bringing out the big guns to end this fight as quickly as possible. I cast Solea of Excommunication to massively boost my damage output. This led to Our Lady going down in record time, being unable to even complete her first round of giant laser beam attacks. In the next room, I grabbed some burning oil for Gemino, then headed through to grab another Mea Culpa damage upgrade, along with some useful moves like the thrusting dash. From there, I headed back to see Gemino to complete one of the most important quests in the game for this challenge. A quest that gives us early access to a really helpful prayer that can reduce a lot of risk coming from healing being hard to obtain. Of course, I completely forgot the reason I had helped Gemino at this stage, and instead thought I had wasted my time by only securing an item that I couldn't even use on this run, the Frozen Olive. Don't worry though, I did remember later in this run what I was trying to get, and I'll even grab it. Only, it was immediately after the point where I could have otherwise got it anyway, completely negating my potential early advantage. What an idiot. I'll be sure to highlight my stupidity when it comes round again. With this mistake ignored, at least for now, I made my way down to Echoes of Salt, where I got to try out the sliding thrust for the first time this run. This was absolutely going to be a mainstay for this build. After that, I took a quick trip to Perpetua's grave to grab the incomplete scapular, since it would be nice to go for the true ending. Angustias was up next, and I was moderately worried about this one. It's an easy fight overall, but there was the potential to fall off the edge, resulting in an immediate run ender. I also generally find it fairly tough to avoid taking chip damage from the boss's various ranged attacks. In the interest of getting this one over as quickly as I could, and minimising said chip damage, I brought out Solea once more. It really was amazing how much damage this added to our standard attacks, which end up taking about 5% of the boss's health off per blow. The boss's health bar utterly dissolved, at a rate that somehow meant the second phase didn't even properly trigger. I honestly didn't even know that was possible. With Tre Angustias down and Estras mitigated by having the incomplete scapular, I entered the middle section of this challenge. The journey through the patio of the Silent Steps was a little more nerve-wracking than I had hoped, with the jumping fire pot throwers embarrassing me and wiping out my health given half a chance. Of course, I didn't exactly help myself by carelessly running into form traps, just for the fun of it. At this point, I took some time to grab a few items that would seriously improve my survivability. In Mother of Mothers, I grabbed the Consecrated Amethyst for when I needed a serious magic resistance boost. I supplemented this by detouring back into the Desecrated Cistern to solve a brief puzzle and to grab the best physical damage resistance item in the game, the Silver Grape. Even better than this though was the reward for braving the superpowered enemies of Mourning and Havoc, the Light of the Lady of the Lamp. This amazing bead gives a flat 20% damage resistance boost across the board, as long as we don't have any bile flasks. There is seriously no way this will ever be getting unequipped. With the Penitent One feeling a fair bit more tanky, I headed down into the Library of the Negated Words. This area wasn't so bad. The enemies could be a little annoying and were certainly able to deal some damage, but there were piles of books all over the place that could be smashed to keep us in a decent shape. Thankfully, this area's versions of the Ghastly Baroness proved to be far easier to deal with than those in the convent. The prolonged energy beams are much easier to avoid than the laser blasts. This area also has loads of brilliant goodies as always. For this run, the standouts were the Amber Eye, which provided high levels of damage resistance to lightning, and the drop of Coagulated Ink, which allowed us to deal mega prayer damage when things started to get a little bit dicey. Even better, we managed to secure another health upgrade and a free heal. The Sleeping Canvases was a fairly uneventful location, although I did grab the Wicker Knot from the shop, which mega boosts poison damage resistance. I also took this opportunity to meet Hoffenero, who furnishes us with the Linen of Golden Thread, a relic that essentially removes the game's bottomless pits and allows you to fall to a load of secret areas. I tried to keep this on as much as possible to minimise the risk of insta-death. With this item secured, I turned my gaze towards Exposito Scion of Abjuration. I wasn't overly worried about this fight, to be honest, although I did make sure I was paying attention to ensure I avoided the baby's insta-kill rip you in two attack. That being said, I did have one close call, where a random scorpion tail attack almost put me in the exact wrong spot. In terms of defeating the boss, I took a lead from my prayer only run, and combined the drop of Coagulated Ink with Debla of the Lights to make this fight entirely trivial. After that, I secured another Mea Culpa upgrade and the big ball of red wax. Along with the big ball of blue wax I grabbed earlier and didn't bother to mention, I then solved a simple puzzle to grab an item that I was really excited about. Now, some of you may have noticed that I haven't mentioned Mea Culpa hearts so far in this run, and there's a reason for that. I only had place in my own empty heart for one possibility. That which I expected to be my true love of this run, the molten heart of boiling blood. This thing was literally made for this run, in that it restores your health every time you kill an enemy, and it was finally available to me. Surely things were about to get a whole lot easier. Then the penny dropped. My heart shattered. What a fool I had been. I may have had the answer to all my needs, yet all it could do was taunt me for all the good it was to me. I couldn't use it. You can't equip a Mea Culpa heart without resting at a Prie Dieu. And as much as I could twist the rules a little to justify feeding my children,
feed your children.
I couldn't exactly bend them to make this challenge easier. Or could I?
Nope.
What a silly thought brought about by an utterly crushing moment of disappointment. Instead, I attempt to pay penance for my moment of near weakness by continuing my suffering in this run. Or perhaps I had already paid my penance in advance. I finally remembered why I had helped Gemino oh so long ago. It turns out you get early access to a cave with a brilliant prayer. A cave that can only otherwise be accessed by equipping the linen of golden thread. An item I just got access to not long ago. Well, despite not getting the early advantage I had hoped, I did now secure the Seta Doloroso, which allows me to heal a reasonable amount of health when attacking enemies with the Mea Culpa. Assuming I have the fervour, it can help a lot with getting back into fighting shape. Unfortunately, it isn't quite as useful in all of the boss fights due to the long casting time, short period of application, and small windows to attack. With the right setup you can improve casting time and duration, but really when I was fighting the toughest bosses I prioritised damage resistance. My next job was to carve a path through Mother of Mothers so I could secure another damage upgrade and bring Melquiades down. This fight was fairly sloppy if I'm being honest. I had to take out the hands before dealing with Melquiades, but I just wasn't very good at doing this, and dodging the boss's attacks at the same time. I never exactly got into danger per se, although I did take advantage of the healing I could get anyway. Melquiades has a fairly large vulnerability window, which allowed me to top up my health using Seta Doloroso. After a few rounds of back and forwards, and taking an embarrassing number of blows, I finished Melquiades and pushed on. At this point in the run, I decided to start chipping away at the various tasks I needed to complete to access the true ending, so I paid Esdras a quick visit. Then got to committing some major sins by defiling confessor statues and conquering the associated dungeons. Thankfully, this was a pretty straightforward endeavour. And yes, before anyone comments, this did require me to equip the Immaculate Bead and die a few times. From my point of view, this is a perfectly reasonable choice as it gives us access to the true ending, but do let me know if you disagree. I wouldn't classify the early stages of the Archcathedral rooftops as hard, but there were quite a few enemies that could dish out reasonable damage and could be tricky to avoid. Thankfully, Seta Doloroso kept us in decent shape most of the time. Even better, I was able to secure another health upgrade. The higher we got, the tougher things did tend to be, particularly when we had to deal with Esdras clones and their friends simultaneously. After slaying an Amagura and his caged seraph, I headed through to the Wall of Holy Prohibitions to take both of the Wardens of the Silent Sorrow down. It really is amazing how simple they are to deal with at this point in the game. In the jail area, I freed more than a few prisoners from their eternal torment and smashed my way through the Lionhearts. I then solved a puzzle to gain access to Quirce's Scorched Bead for a mega fire resistance boost. This got put to use soon enough as we took the fight to Quirce himself, and it was an alright fight in terms of difficulty. I've always enjoyed the setting and pace of this fight, so I settled in to enjoy this attempt. It wasn't flawless, however his attacks are all physical or fire, which means that we took absolutely minimal damage from him when I did slip up. Particularly towards the end, I lost a bit of focus and got caught by a number of fire pillar attacks. It wasn't enough to stop me though, as I brought Quirce to his knees. Following this, I smashed the last Confessor statue and dispatched the foes in the dungeon with relative ease. This resulted in a halfway decent reward, the Seashell of Inverted Spiral, which provides a small amount of elemental damage resistance. This also ticked another box in our quest by providing us with the Custodia of Sin. After taking a peaceful moment to enjoy the scenic backdrop while riding the gondola up the mountain, I headed back into the convent to secure the final health upgrade. And it was a good thing too, as it was time to start facing the game's toughest foes. Which is exactly why I performed some last minute preparations. I first secured the final rosary knot, and then used it to unlock the final rosary mystery. A quick trip up to the Archcathedral rooftops also allowed me to grab the second last Mea Culpa upgrade for a much appreciated damage bump, and then it was on to Mourning and Havoc, which is just a tough ass area. I maximised my physical and lightning resistance to improve the odds of making it through this area in one piece. And while it did help, I still flirted aggressively with defeat. The anchor chucking guys hit hard and can handle a lot of punishment, but I returned the favour by hitting just that little bit harder. The lightning traps weren't fun at all. They didn't hit too hard, but there were loads of them, and it's easy to get ground down by them. By the time I made it towards the far end of the area, I was in terrible shape, and it only got worse as I tried to deal with the last few enemies in my way. It was a terrible place to be. Being one hit from death, one hit from failing to run, having to dodge multiple enemies and traps, and then, if I somehow managed it, I have to face off against one of the game's super bosses. But I do make it through, so I guess now all I have to do is survive Sierpes, despite being in terrible shape. But yeah, really, I wasn't all that worried about it, to be honest with you. Turns out, I very recently managed to down this great serpent without any upgrades whatsoever. So as long as I could dodge her first blow, then heal up a bit using Zeta Dolorosa, it was more or less a foregone conclusion. The first phase was trivial, with me smacking Sierpes about left, right and centre. A few spike attacks did sneak through in my haste to deal damage, but I was comfortable keeping my health topped up. The second phase was a little less smooth compared to my no upgrade run. Although ironically, this was mostly due to me having more advanced moves that knocked my timing way out. More than a few times I ended up using an extended combo or upslash attack that left me in a vulnerable position. With my hubris a little more in check, I was able to proceed into the third phase and dished out the damage without the previous timing problems. The wheels did start to come off a little bit towards the end of the fight though, as I smashed into the spike pillars about a half dozen times, before eventually pulling my act together and finishing Sierpes off. With the broken left eye of the traitor in hand, I desperately fled from the hellhole that is Mourning in Havoc and on to the next challenge. That challenge being Isidora, Voice of the Dead. Now, I've had a lot of practice against Isidora too, or at least a lot of practice with the first half of this fight. The trick here is to just be patient. Most of her attacks can be parried relatively easily, which creates a nice chance for some follow-up damage. The homing fireball attack was a double-edged sword. It creates an amazing chance to tear Isidora to pieces, but was also the hardest attack to deal with in the early fight. You have to either jump over or slide under the fireballs, and sometimes the spacing makes that really hard. You also need to make sure that you leave yourself in a good position to deal with Isidora's follow-up attacks. All in all, not too bad, at least until Isidora caused the fireballs to spawn on their own. At this point her attack pattern did get a little trickier, but really the issue was you just don't always have the space you need to deal with every attack because of the homing fireballs. Things started to come apart at the seams very quickly as I got sliced, diced, burned and backed into the corner. A less well-equipped Penitent One would be dead at this point, but I predicted this issue and protected against it by going hard to provide high physical and fire resistance. Isidora drew all the fireballs to her and triggered what can be assumed to be her ultimate fire pillar attack. This one was great for us though, as it was a chance to attack her non-stop. Even better, a quick cast of Zeta Dolorosa helped get us into almost perfect shape again. She made one last attempt to stop us, which we took on the chin, before returning the damage in kind through a thrust of her own. Isidora falls and we grab the severed right eye of the traitor. After a quick trip to the Note of the Three Words, I had a critical choice to make. We were given the apodictic Heart of the Mea Culpa, which we need to equip for the true ending. Although technically we shouldn't be allowed to, as it would require us to rest at a Prie Dieu. Is breaking the rules really worth it to access the true ending? Well, I didn't have to debate this one for long in all honesty. I think we all know that equipping this increases the overall difficulty of the challenge by forcing us to face Crisanta's second phase. This massively increases the risk of outright failure, and I'd be absolutely insane for taking that risk at this stage in the run. So, I take that risk. I bend the rules, I equip the heart, and push on to wage war with a much improved, much more dangerous Crisanta. Well, immediately after I remember that there's one final Mea Culpa upgrade to grab, that is. After being informed that we are in fact the absolute worst, and that we are totally going to get unalived for all the nonsense we have been perpetrating, Crisanta gives it large and starts showing us why she is chief deputy to the big red boss man. After a not so smooth start, things settle down. I was able to deal loads of damage through thrust attacks, and they were easy to deliver. She had her own counterattack that could be manipulated and parried easily enough for brilliant damage. The second half of this phase was a little tougher, with Crisanta interspersing regular combat with flying thrusts that we need to dodge or parry. After dealing with 3, we often got a free chance to counter thrust ourselves. Then it was back to mistiming most of our parries and paying for it by taking big old blows to the face. Well, maybe paying for it is a bit extreme. We had once again set our damage resistance up in such a way that our survivability was surprisingly high, so these blows didn't put us in any immediate danger. A couple more swipes and Crisanta took a knee, but we all know that this is far from over. Some banging tunes kicked in to make sure we knew that this was going the distance. This phase is more or less the first phase, but on steroids. She moves faster, she hits harder, and she transitions between all of her attack types much more often, making it far harder to do anything other than cower in fear as she knocks us about a bit. And you can tell the fret is much higher, simply by how quickly my health bar began to deplete. Thrusting attacks once again proved to be great for big damage and for closing the distance quickly enough that I could land a blow. Of course, we are then left vulnerable to our follow-up attacks, or 2, or 3. It was a proper slugfest, where we were just trading blows and both suffering for it. Thankfully though, we were depleting her health faster than she was depleting ours. She used her sword shockwave attack, and I got caught not once but twice, bringing us into the danger zone. Of course, the follow-up thrust pushed her to the edge too. Then she did the exact same thing again, and I made the exact same mistake again, and I delivered the exact same counter again. And it was enough. 2 bruisers entered. One kneels, bloody and broken. The other barely standing, almost certainly concussed, and one blow away from restarting the run. But alive. And alive was all that mattered. With that victory, the Penitent One showed Crisanta the truth of the high walls and breaks her from their grasp. His Holiness Escobar talks a good game.
I bless you forever in death.
But he was, as usual, about as effective as a chocolate teapot. I focused on thrusts and dodging his pitiful attacks before we progressed into this slightly less pathetic phase. I quickly whacked the golden sword into submission, then started wailing on Big Red himself. Naturally, I made my expected handful of mistakes, resulting in some unnecessary damage being taken. Thankfully, this was partially mitigated by using Seta Dolorosa. I didn't quite manage to bring Big Red down in one round, but my second chance came around quickly enough and I capitalised upon it. And then, finally, I came to the final challenge of the game. Escobar, Sentinel of the Eternal Procession. This fight should have been utterly trivial. It's a gimmick fight more or less, but it had surprised me before and tried its best to ruin a previous challenge run. And it tried again here. The problem was that everything gets unequipped when you enter this fight, so all of that prep work I had done to ensure I minimised the damage I took went immediately out of the window. Add to that the fact that I am absolutely bloody useless at avoiding his attacks, and I was quickly in trouble. My health started to dip dangerously low. What if I died? Would that be the run over at the last hurdle? I mean, sure, you respawn straight away without involving the Prie Dieu, so it wouldn't technically be a failure, but you try telling that to my pride. And then it happened. I was a blow away from death. I was terrified of failing, and then I got hit. I should have been dead. What had happened? And then I got hit again. Yet I kept going. For some reason, the game was on my side. It knew how I had suffered for this. It knew I deserved this. It gave me this. Either that, or it turns out that you only die in this last fight if you actually fall off the edge, and that getting hit simply stuns you and makes it a little bit more likely to happen. Maybe I just got really lucky? No matter. I took that luck and ran with it. I finished Big Red, saw the high walls defeated, and ended the run victorious. Somehow, I had survived. In the meantime, if you need an intense challenge fix, why don't you check out the video linked on screen? That one is a real doozy. Anyway, thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, and I will see you on the next one. Goodbye.